But welcome to our webinar tonight. My name is Tracy Carluccio. I'm Deputy Director of Delaware Riverkeeper Network, and we're here holding our virtual forum tonight to talk about fully banning fracking in the Delaware River watershed. Thank you for joining us on this beautiful June evening. And as we gather tonight, I want to just run through a few housekeeping issues. First, introduce yourself in the chat. Everyone can find out who else is on the webinar forum tonight, and say where you're from if you'd like, whatever you'd like, but go ahead and introduce yourself. We'd love to hear from you. Also, the format tonight is a webinar, so that means that questions that you may have as you hear the presentation should be put into that little box that's at the bottom of your screen that says Q&A. Don't put your questions in the chat, please. Put them in the Q&A. That's the question and answer box. It also means that the speaking roles, those who can speak tonight, are those who are the presenters rather than those who are attending. Also, it is being recorded tonight, so we're informing you of that. And after the webinar is over, everybody who registered for the webinar will be receiving a link to the recording. So you can share that around, and if you missed, if you know someone who missed it, they could listen to it by looking at it through the link. So we're going to have a program of 1 hour tonight. First, I'm briefly going to give you an overview of where we're at regarding fracking in the Delaware River watershed and the ban. Then there's going to be 4 speakers who are going to address 4 of the major substantive issues regarding frack wastewater produced by fracking. Then we're going to go into actions and the actions and tactics that we will be employing and taking part in, and that you're invited to take part in the coming weeks and months. And our major summer action is going to be introduced as well. We're launching that tonight. So this is how you can get involved, which is key. And then we'll have the last about 15 minutes on questions. So put your questions right into the Q&A, and we'll try to answer them. And all of our panelists tonight, everybody who is a presenter, will be able to answer those questions. So you can ask an individual, or you could just say, you know, not ask anybody in particular. So let me go now into where are we at with fracking in the Delaware River watershed. So first of all, I guess the best way to describe it is we're at a fork in the road. And that fork in the road is a decision point. And it's going to come in the coming months. And what happens in this decision point is going to affect the future of the Delaware River watershed, all of its communities, the environment. And it's not only us that we're talking about, but we're talking about future generations. So we're at an important moment in history. Most of you know there has been a moratorium on fracking and drilling throughout the Delaware River watershed that prevented it from starting here. And that's been in place since 2010. In 2017, new draft gas regulations were proposed by the Delaware River Basin Commission, the agency in charge of overseeing regulation of the Delaware River watershed. And those regulations would ban fracking, but would allow the wastewater produced by fracking to be imported to the watershed for disposal here, and would also allow water to be exported from our watershed to fuel fracking in other places. So what did we do? And we all rallied, all of us. Those here on this forum here tonight, which is the Delaware River Frack Ban Coalition, and all of you, most of you are members of our watershed community and took part in the 4-year fight that ensued. And after all was said and done, we were all very concerned that yes, we wanted to ban fracking, but we wanted to fight and stop the rest of the gas regulations, which would allow this import of toxic pollution and deplete our precious water resources, and also enable and fuel fracking in other places, unconscionable. So over 70,000 comments were put into the record at the Delaware River Basin Commission. Over 104,000 people signed petitions that were delivered by hand at rallies at each of the governor's offices who serve on the Delaware River Basin Commission to impress on them the public sentiment on this project. And there were also countless rallies and demonstrations, call-in days, emails, and all of this, social media. It all finally culminated in February of this year. The Delaware River Basin Commission voted to permanently ban fracking throughout the Delaware River watershed. It was an epic battle, at least 11 years since 2010. It really began before that, and an historic outcome, and it's permanent. However, the job isn't done. The commissioners also voted to issue draft gas regulations by September 30th of this year that would govern the import of frack wastewater for disposal and the export of water for fracking outside the watershed. So our path at this fork in the road is pretty well defined. The timeline is between now and September 30th when the regs come out. And then on September 30th, we'll go into high gear, basically put metal to the pedal to take part in the public participation process like we did last time and make sure everybody gets a say and gets to weigh in about what we want for our watershed now and for the future. Then the goal, it's the same as well. It is to ban, we've accomplished the frack ban. Now we need to finish the job, have them finish the job to ban the storage, processing, disposal, and discharge of wastewater produced by fracking from being dumped here, and to ban the withdrawal of water from the Delaware River for use to frack other places. We're asking this question that we have asked from the beginning to the DRBC commissioners. Why would you ban fracking and allow the pollution from fracking to occur anyway? And why would you ban fracking and allow our water to be depleted by fracking anyway? Why would you want to fuel fracking outside of our watershed? These are questions that they must answer. The way we want them to answer it is to say, no, we're not going to allow that to happen. We're going to ban it all. Now, our targets are also pretty much the same. These are the people that we're talking to, the people we're appealing to, the decision makers that we have been confronting and will continue to confront with the facts and the science that we're going to be discussing here tonight. And they're all pretty much the same. It is the Delaware River Basin Commission. Most of you know that this is the agency that makes regulations and oversees the water of the Delaware River watershed and the watershed itself. And it's made up of 5 votes. It's the governors of the 4 states that flow to the Delaware. So that's New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Delaware, all represented here tonight, and the federal government, the Army Corps of Engineers. So what has really changed this year? We have a new president. So for the last 4 years, it has been the Trump administration, and actually Trump himself, the president, is the 5th appointed member represented by the Army Corps of Engineers. So now we have a Biden administration. So we are really talking to President Biden when we talk to the federal representative on the DRBC. So this is the message that we'll be delivering to all of them. All of our actions and the forums and the webinars, we'll be having more this summer, are all aimed at influencing those decision makers through us, the people. So let's get into our program. And first, we're going to hear from Doug O'Malley. Then we're going to hear from Sahana Rao. Then we're going to hear from Taylor McFarland, and then Barbara Arundel. They're going to either introduce themselves or the person before them will. But after that, we'll be going into actions and then our questions and answers. So I'll kick it off now over to Doug O'Malley.
Thank you so much, Tracy. And it's so good to see so many of you in the chat. So thank you for joining us on a beautiful June evening. My name is Doug O'Malley, a director of Environment eJersey. And I can't think of a better campaign where, literally the work of activists and so many of you on the phone and joining us through cyberspace has allowed us to reach this point where we are on the cusp of victory, right? We are a long way from where we were a decade ago. I want to talk specifically about why the industry is so desperate to have fracking wastewater be used and to be able to steal water from the Delaware River watershed. And that's because the fracking industry is not going away, sadly. And if anything, it requires more work and more water to be able to extract what they want. We're seeing the volume of water required by the frackers to become supersized. So this is not a supersized meal that anyone wants to get, but we are seeing not just the water increase, but the size of the horizontal wellbores increase massively. So they're growing up to 4 miles long. The amount of water per well is getting up to 20 million gallons of water. And this is obviously the same time that we have massive fluctuation in our water supply. This is the same time we're seeing more extremes in climate change with more precipitation all at once, and then obviously more drought. And the frackers are literally saying, we need that water, right? And this is, this has meant that the old estimates of 5 million gallons a well have disappeared, and the flow back from a well are approximately 10 to 15%. That means that there's more flow back, and flow back is obviously the waste that comes back up. So 10 to 15% of 20 million, that's a heck of a lot. That's at least 2 million gallons. That's a lot more flow back that the frackers have to put somewhere. Quite simply, it's taking more work to destroy the earth from the frackers' perspective. And that means that they are getting increasingly desperate to figure out some place they can dump their waste and additional places they can steal water. And that's ultimately the biggest problem for us remains one of geography. Wayne County is just over the hills, as they like to say, from the northeastern portion of the Susquehanna watershed that is the heart of the Marcellus Shale play. And that's why, even though the DRBC has said the right things, they did not say the right things 4 years ago. That was not addressed in 2017, and the new rules that are being proposed this year need to finish the job to not allow any injection of wastewater within the basin. Part of the reason why this is so important is because the transport, handling, processing, and storage of frack wastewater is incredibly poorly tracked. And I just want to give out a shout out to Tracy here, because the only way that we knew that fracking wastewater was being dumped in New Jersey waters, and specifically in the lower Delaware, is because Tracy, went out a decade ago and got files that were only released, I think, every 6 months in Harrisburg. That is not exactly transparency. And we are massively concerned that the industry, if given the opportunity, would love to be able to come into the Delaware River watershed. The other thing to kind of note here too is that the injections, there's a couple things. It's not like in some parts of the Marcellus Shale areas, dumping is literally just that. There are kind of massive frack wastewater pools. The more sophisticated technology is injecting fracking wastewater deep into the ground. Increasingly, that is obviously that's incredibly dangerous. States like Ohio are turning away, are turning the frackers away. But obviously, as I said before, the thirst of frackers for water has grown. And just to give you an idea of how much water we're talking about, some of these wells need 39 million gallons of water. That's equal to the daily use of 400,000 people, which is the size of Newark and Jersey City. And obviously, we are highly dependent as a state upon the Delaware River watershed. 3 million people get their drinking water from there. The North Jersey District Water Supply gets half of its daily water supply directly from the Delaware River watershed. That's 250 million gallons a day, right? So when we talk about a well using up to 40 million gallons, that's a lot. And I think it's critical to know too, we think of the water, the water cycle is obviously being restorative. In this case, the water the frackers are using is essentially gone forever because they're polluting it. And some of that water is lost because it becomes unrecoverable because it's so deep within the earth. And in that case, it's not returning to its source. So it becomes, as the hydrologists like to say, depletive use, because it literally is stealing that surface water and it never is returned. So that's devastating to our stream ecologies and water quality. It's devastating to all the kind of habitat and ecologies of local watersheds. And honestly, too, it's just not how the hydrologic cycle is supposed to work. We're not supposed to steal water from one area to give it to another, especially to give it to a extractive industry and polluting industry like the frackers. So I'm gonna wrap up here because there's more to come. But I think the key message here is that fracking has not gone away. It's still as bad as ever, and they still have their eyes on our precious Delaware River watershed. I'm going to turn it over to next is Sahana Rao, who's with NRDC. Sahana.
Thanks, Doug, and thanks everyone again for being here. My name is Sahana Rao. I am an attorney with the Natural Resources Defense Council based out of New York, and I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk to you all about total dissolved solids, which are one of the primary and most intractable fracking pollutants in the Delaware River Basin. Now, fracking wastewater and solid waste is loaded with total dissolved solids, which typically contain pretty potent salts. If you just look at the sheer mass, total dissolved solids are the largest component of fracking waste. And in such excessive amounts, total dissolved solids are very difficult to keep under control once they're in the waterway. Now, the Delaware River Basin Commission has set a limit of 500 milligrams per liter of total dissolved solids in fracking wastewater discharges for the portion of the river from its start going down to the southern Philadelphia region. So just keep that figure in mind for a second, 500 milligrams per liter. This standard is not going to protect the river's aquatic life. And in fact, it threatens the future of fish in the Delaware River estuary and the bay. Studies in other estuaries show that total dissolved solids levels should be kept below 200 milligrams per liter. Remember I said 500 before? 200 milligrams per liter to maintain healthy spawning conditions. On top of that, EPA has found that thermal pollution stress combined with high total dissolved solids concentrations increases fish mortality. In other words, the discharge of these common and high contaminants that are present in high amounts, total dissolved solids, that is allowed under DRBC's regulation far exceeds the limitation needed for fish to safely be able to breed. And these high total dissolved solid concentrations will also combine with climate change impacts to shorten fish lifespans. Now, if you look at the region of the Delaware River encompassing most of the estuaries south of Philadelphia, going to the bay and the ocean, the Delaware River Basin Commission currently allows a total dissolved solid standard of 1,000 milligrams per liter. And again, I know I'm throwing numbers at you, but that's up to twice the amount that was allowed closer to Philadelphia that I mentioned before. Now, in the estuary, drinking water is not a protected use under DRBC regulations, so safe drinking water standards don't apply, and that allows for less strict pollution controls. DRBC unfortunately also allows for mixing zones in this region, which means that if pollution in the wastewater doesn't meet clean water standards at the point of discharge, it can be mixed or diluted by the waterway so that it meets that required standard at a point further downstream. What this means in practice is that wastewater discharges at the point where they enter the waterway can contain higher concentrations of contaminants than the 1,000 milligram per liter limit that I just mentioned. Needless to say, that increases the critical pollution concerns I mentioned before at these discharge points. Furthermore, since the tides impacting the river carry pollutants upstream and into tributaries, there is also a risk of negative impacts to upstream river zones that are tidally influenced and to areas that do provide drinking water, including the state of Delaware's tributary drinking water intakes and the Philadelphia and South Jersey drinking water intakes that cumulatively serve millions of people. Now, compounding the problems I just described with total dissolved solids regulation and mixing zones, the Delaware River Basin Commission proposed in its draft 2017 natural gas regulations to use background concentrations of pollutants in certain circumstances. And a background concentration, just to explain really quickly, is the measurement of the existing level of a pollutant in the waterway. So DRBC was proposing to use these background concentrations as the contaminant limits that a discharger of effluent could not exceed. The problem with this approach is that if discharges to the waterway can contain contaminants up to the background concentration, that waterway won't have a chance to improve and become cleaner beyond that background contaminant concentration. Cumulatively, with each discharge of wastewater containing up to background levels of a contaminant entering a waterway that is already starting out at this background level, the overall water quality will be allowed to degrade to a point worse than the initial background concentration. DRBC proposed this approach instead of calculating a numeric standard that limits the pollutant enough to encourage a cleaner waterway overall. And they may do the same in the upcoming draft regulations that are due out in September. This is especially problematic where concentrations of some pollutants are already too high. In the Delaware estuary, parameters like total dissolved solids, which I was talking about earlier, far exceed healthy conditions and are in grave need of improvement. Now, on top of this flawed approach, DRBC also allows open lagoons to temporarily store wastewater with total dissolved solids that can't meet water quality standards during, for example, low flow periods. Then they simply release that wastewater at a later date. So not only are the regulations not strict enough to protect the waterway, DRBC actually allows for loading the estuary with these total dissolved solids. So in summary, when it comes to total dissolved solids, lax regulations, the background concentration approach, mixing zones, and the timed releases of pollutants to the Delaware River all undermine the Clean Water Act's mandates to improve our waterways to meet fishable and swimmable goals. And they're all setting in motion a downward spiral of degradation for the Delaware River. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Taylor McFarland. Thanks, everyone.
Hey everyone, thanks Ahana, and thank you Tracy and the Delaware Riverkeeper Network for organizing this wonderful event. Good evening everyone, I'm Taylor McFarland and I am the interim director for the New Jersey Sierra Club, and I will briefly discuss some of the toxic issues involving fracking waste. So another reason why we need a full fracking ban in the Delaware watershed is because the regulations and standards in place don't cover all of the harmful pollutants in fracking waste. So if we continue to allow fracking activities elsewhere, it still leaves the basin vulnerable to dangerous and toxic chemicals that are used or generated in the fracking process. So some of these chemicals include what Sahara just discussed, which are total dissolved solids, TDS. We also have ammonia and nitrogen, chloride, sulfate, oil and grease, VOCs, and the list goes on. And they're very technical and they're hard to pronounce, so I will only go into those few. So allowing these chemicals to be dumped into the Delaware River Basin endangers public health and the environment. Some are carcinogenic, some have known health effects, and some are toxic to aquatic and plant life. Recently, Yale University's School of Public Health actually did a study of the 119 chemicals used in fracking. Only 20% of the compounds used in fracking had sufficient data for the study, which is a huge issue that I'll go into a little bit later. More concerningly, 44% of the water pollutants and 60% of the air pollutants were either confirmed or possible carcinogens. And 55 unique compounds with carcinogenic potential could be released to both water or air, and 20 chemicals had evidence of increased risk of leukemia or lymphoma specifically. So as I said earlier about having insufficient data for certain chemicals is a major issue. So the presence of chemicals that are unstudied, unregulated, or unknown is probably one of the biggest threats frack wastewater presents to public health and the environment. In a national study of fracking and drinking water, EPA identified 1,606 chemicals in fracking fluid or drilling wastewater, yet only 173 had toxicity level values for sources that meet EPA standards for conducting risk assessments. So this data gap means that dangerous chemicals are being used, but not evaluated for toxicity, which is insane. So we all know that the Delaware River is an environmental treasure on the East Coast that supplies clean drinking water for more than 15 million people. The river includes acres of forest, open space, and waterways that provide habitat for hundreds of wildlife species. So taking into account how harmful these pollutants are, coupled with the lack of data or comprehensive regulations, a full fracking ban is critical. So we need to ban the import of frack wastewater and the export for fracking to protect public health, the environment, and our tourism and fishing industries from these toxic chemicals. So now I want to introduce Barbara Arundel from DCS, who will speak about how fracking wastewater is radioactive. Take it away, Barbara. I think you're on mute.
All right, there we go. Thank you. When a gas well is fracked, gas and fluids gush back up to the surface, not only from the extreme pressures needed to accomplish hydraulic fracturing, but also because the formation is overpressured, meaning it has its own pressure pushing out from that layer. This pressure is why wastewater continues to surface and cannot be stopped. Called flowback, it contains water, chemicals and sand used in frac fluids, and deep geology pollutants that are released from the buried shale formations. It is well known and long understood that the Marcellus Shale Formation is radioactive. That radioactivity is one of the markers used to locate the oil and gas formation layer. The naturally occurring radioactive materials, or NORM, are not a health hazard when buried a mile down, but are highly dangerous when they are brought to the surface. There is no way to avoid these pollutants, making wastewater produced by fracking inevitably contaminated with radioactivity. Other wastes and the gas stream itself also carry radioactivity. Exposure to these radioactive materials by the public will occur, increasing the likelihood of cancers. Radium-226 has a half-life of 1,600 years, so it will be present in the environment for thousands of years. It degrades to radon, emitting highly bioactive radioactive particles. The dangers of radon are well known, but it is more than radon. Radioactivity is measured by concentration, radioactivity intensity, biological impact, and/or amount absorbed. The amount and type of energy emitted by the particle release is expressed by it being alpha, beta, or gamma radiation. To avoid confusion, I will only use picocuries, a radioactivity intensity measurement, but you will see these other types of measurements if you look into this further. Lower numbers are best. For example, the EPA maximum contaminant level for radium in drinking water is 5 picocuries per liter. The flowback, called brine, because of its high salt content and in an effort to hide its toxic components, can be highly radioactive, as concentrated as 15,000 picocuries per liter. And each time the water is reused at another frac, gas, or oil well, more radium, uranium, strontium, and other radioactive materials are added. These materials are also easily dissolved in high salt, so are carried in the salty wastewater. Once the material is moved from the formation layer, it becomes T-norm, or technically enhanced naturally occurring radioactive materials, which should be governed by additional rules related to T-norm, but is not, because the waste is mostly exempt from protective regulations via 1980s and 2005 arrangements favoring fossil fuel industry over human and environmental health. These exemptions can be overcome by state or regional authorities like the DRBC. The DRBC can and must ban the import, treatment, and disposal of fracking wastewater in order to avoid the unnecessary importing of radioactive waste into the Delaware Basin. A Duke University study of a stream in Pennsylvania below a frack wastewater treatment plant found radium-226 levels in stream sediments at the point of discharge were about 200 times greater than the upstream sediments and background sediments, and above low-level radioactive waste disposal thresholds. Government does not properly regulate frac wastewater containing T-norm, and there is no indication in prior draft gas regulations that DRBC is planning to tackle the problem of radioactivity in the wastewater imports. The concentrated residuals that are filtered from wastewater at treatment plants can occur at levels that are so dangerous they would need to be removed to a specially designed storage facility, such as those used for nuclear waste. But that kind of special handling would need to be built into the regulation of the residuals as hazardous waste, which is not being proposed. In addition, the lack of analysis at well sites and related lack of truck signage placarding that would accurately reflect the level of radioactivity of transported wastewater adds additional risk to movement of radioactive wastewater from outside of the basin to the Delaware River watershed for treatment and disposal. Plus, there is the ever-present inevitability of transport accidents and deliberate illegal dumping. We must insist that the waste not be imported. Thank you. And here's Eric Weltman to talk about actions.
All right. Thank you. My name is Eric Weltman, and I'm a Brooklyn-based senior organizer with Food and Water Watch. I want to start by thanking Tracy Carluccio from the Delaware Riverkeeper Network. Thank you, Tracy, for all of your amazing leadership. We're here in no small part because of all your tremendous leadership and all the other amazing activists and allies on tonight's webinar. I also want to put my contact information in the chat, just in case there's any questions that people have after the webinar. So we know why we need to win, and now we're going to discuss how we're going to do it. In 2014, Governor Cuomo declared a ban on fracking in New York, a hard-fought historic victory that was the result of a tremendous amount of grassroots energy laser-focused on the governor. We knew that Cuomo was the decider. It was he and he alone who was the ultimate decision maker in whether or not fracking was allowed in New York. We're facing a similar political dynamic in this campaign, except that the decision making is a bit more diffuse. We have 5 governors and a president who are the deciders, but the organizing principles and practices are essentially the same. It all comes down to building grassroots power and focusing it on these key decision makers. And that means, folks, it all comes down to you, the people on the webinar tonight, and thousands more like you across the region. In the coming months, we are going to turn to you to engage in the tactics that will influence these decision makers. Many of these tactics will be tried and true. Phone calls, call-in days, call-in weeks, petitions, online or otherwise, rallies, hopefully in person, letters to the editor. Some of them will be novel, tailored to take advantage of new technological tools. The messaging may vary slightly from state to state, depending on the motivations of the respective governors, including, for example, if and when they're running for re-election. But again, the fundamental principle remains the same: to engage as many people as we can, friends, family, neighbors, co-workers, local businesses, faith institutions, farmers, kayakers, dog lovers, cat lovers, you name it, in putting pressure on our governors and President Biden. Folks, we have science on our side. The evidence is clear that the entire fracking process is a threat to our health, communities, and environment. With your help, we'll build the power we need to overcome the clout of the oil and gas industry, and we'll channel that power to win the votes we need to completely ban fracking in the Delaware River Basin. Folks, we've done it before, and together we're going to do it again. And with that, I'd like to turn things over to someone who I admire tremendously, a tremendous ally, activist, an all-around awesome guy, Wes Gillingham from Catskill Mountainkeeper. Take it away, Wes.
Thank you, Eric, and thank you everybody for showing up tonight. And you, having sat through, 30 minutes of hearing about the technical issues around fracking, we might all be sitting here wondering, why are we even talking about this? This should have been banned the first time they came through. That's why we need to address our governors, the commissioners, and get them to follow through. As people have talked about the history and how long of a fight this has been in the basin. In New York, we banned it for multiple reasons. And it was banned because it was not considered safe for the people of New York State. And that was based on the commissioner's decision, looking after coming up with 1,200 pages of regulations that we all commented on. It was deemed they were not adequate regulations. This has been going on since 2007, 2008, and we need to keep that pressure up on those individuals. New York State just passed legislation to codify, make it permanent, a complete ban on fracking, and then we just also this last session changed the process of how fracking waste is treated in our state. It will be going through they're going to codify those rules and come up with the specific regulations, but they're not safe. And why would the state of New York not ban this in the Delaware River Basin, the longest free flowing river? I'm going to quote just from Pennsylvania. New York and Pennsylvania have this long border, and Governor Wolf said 2 years ago, what we are doing to both ban fracking in the Delaware River watershed, as well as efforts to further ban the waters and the materials that underpin that, is something we should all take pride in. And that's still a work in progress. Well, 2 years later, it's still a work in progress, but we're, as Eric said, we can complete this process. We need to get the pressure on Governor Wolf, even though he said such an amazing line. We also have a bunch of, well, I'll just say it personally, from my opinion, crazy people trying to push or suing the Delaware River Basin, saying it's not a fair moratorium. So you get it. You need to work in your states. If you're from Pennsylvania and New York, we need to keep that pressure up. And at the end of this, stick it out, stick this out, because we're going to have a fun launch for one of the things that we're all going to work together to put together to highlight why we stopped this. And I will pass it back to Doug.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Wes. And I'm excited to talk about two very important entities on DRBC. One is our New Jersey representative, which is Governor Murphy. He never actually shows up at the meetings, but we know his representative from DP, Jeff Hoffman, trust me, is not an independent actor. And I kind of, in the same way that, we're just talking about where New York and Pennsylvania are, in New Jersey, I actually just dug up a picture from close to 4 years ago at this point, and hopefully people can see it. My internet's a little funky right now, so let's see, there we are. People see that? So I know that might not be coming through entirely, but you can kind of see it's a bunch of us and organizations that's standing next to, I'm going to pull out a little bit, standing next to Governor Murphy.
Take off your blur, Doug.
Oh, the blur, of course, the blur always comes up. All right, let me, I'll talk and work to fix it at the same time. But the reason why I dug this photo up is because the great thing about it is Tracy's holding a sign saying no drilling in the Delaware. And then behind Tracy is a big banner saying no fracking in New Jersey, right? And so the governor, this was in his first couple of weeks in office. And so, of course there's no fracking in New Jersey. The battle was across the river with the DRBC. And so immediately after that kind of congratulatory event, we sat down with the governor and said, look, we need you. And with the governor, I say the governor's staff, We need you to come out with a full ban on fracking and fracking waste in the watershed. And the response is, well, we're not quite there yet. And so this was early in 2018, January of 2018. Over the course of, literally that next year, year plus, we worked to collect, more than 100,000 petitions, which were directly delivered to Governor Murphy and his team. We had a resolution pushed by Senator Greenstein and others to permanently ban fracking and fracking waste in the watershed. And because we did that, Governor Murphy in late January 2019 finally came out and said, I'm with you, right? It took another, almost 2 years, more than 2 years, for that to actually end up with action at the DRBC level. So this is a reminder, right? Politicians say the right thing. Governor Murphy had a great quote in the press release. We want to finish the job. And that's why we know what worked before, those thousands of petitions, those phone calls, the social media actions. We want to make sure that happens again. And then obviously there's a representative that we haven't really focused on in the last 4 years, and now we are, and that's the representative from the federal government, the Army Corps of Engineers. It's always a very, formal and official Army Corps representative at the DRBC. That person is taking orders from the White House. And so now we have a new president, thank God. We want to make sure that President Biden is also doing the right thing. And we all know that President Biden doesn't exactly have the crystal clear record on fracking. We want to make sure that his administration does the right thing here in the Delaware River Basin with a full vote to ban fracking waste and all fracking activities. So that's why, that's why we're doing this. We want to win unanimously. I want to turn it over to Corley Pride with the League of Women Voters from the first state to talk about what Delaware can do to help us win. And Corley,
You're
you're
on
still
mute, Corley, you're muted.
Okay, I'm on. Thank you, Doug. Our Governor John Carney joined the governors of Pennsylvania and New Jersey 2 years ago when they all surprisingly announced that they were all in favor of a complete total ban on fracking. But as with the other governors, we are slow to see the action. And it's very important for Delaware to stop this. We're at the end of the line, and the Delaware Bay is a rather small bay, and it has a limited outlet to the ocean. When toxic chemicals and more importantly, the radioactive materials come down the river, they're going to end up at the silt at the bottom of the Delaware Bay, and they are going to stay there. And rather than being washed out to the ocean, and as you've already heard, they're going to contaminate it for thousands of years. The Delaware Bay is a major economic driver for our small state, fishing and harvesting from the ocean, tourism, trips out to the ocean. It would be a disaster to see the bay harmed. And so it is important that Delawareans and others contact Governor Carney, as well as Governor Cuomo and the Army Corps person to make sure that they follow through on their promise. Thank you, and now on to Eric B.
Okay, sure. All right, hi there, everyone. I'm Eric Benson from Clean Water Action. I'm so excited to tell you about this joint campaign here. We want to talk about this summer photothon, vacation in the basin. We want you to join us in the fun this summer, showing us why you love the Delaware River and the watershed. We're collecting snapshots that you take this summer or previous, we were not picky, of how you enjoy and explore the river basin and how the import and discharge of fracking wastewater and the export and discharge of fracking wastewater and the export and depletion of water for the fracking outside the basin threatens the river and the life that depends on it. The DRBC has banned fracking, but now they need to finish the job by also banning these fracking water specific activities. The photos that we're taking, we can submit them to the DRBC commissioners and the governors so they can visualize what we're saying as this is an issue. And they can eventually vote and draft these natural gas regulations that would ban these water activities. I want you to get creative. Be on the river. Climb a mountain overlooking the river. Have dinner downtown near the river. If you look at a map of the basin here on the left, you can see there's a lot of places you can be within the basin, but not actually on the Delaware River. Just remember to take a picture. Have fun with us. Invite others to join us. Share the Vacation in the Basin Photothon campaign with friends, families, scout troops, hiking groups, fishing enthusiasts, neighbors, everyone you can think of. Not only can we create these tremendous visuals that we'll use to apply to pressure to the governors and commissioners, but we can also identify new and more people to keep updated on the campaigns. We can keep them engaged in the next steps until that we win. I'm going to drop a link in the chat. This is what the online form looks like. Use this to enter your contact information, upload your photo, tell us about your photo. What are you doing? Where are you? And tell us, why is protecting the Delaware River from all frack activities important to you? I want to see you get out there. Have fun. That's what we're doing this summer. Take pictures. Just remember to share them with us and then spread the information about the summer campaign far and wide so that others can enjoy the river totally frack-free, and they can pitch in as well. So thanks so much, and I'm going to turn it over to Tracy.
Thank you. Thank you, Eric. That's great. So, we figured everybody's really hungry to get out again into the watershed, out with friends, being social. And also a lot of people haven't gone on vacations or really been able to explore the way they would have, last year. So now with the COVID in the rearview mirror, hopefully, we'll all be able to do that more. And so we thought, why not just combine it by having people snap pictures of what they're doing and show the Delaware River Basin commissioners, show the governor and the president, what do we love about this watershed and what is threatened? And in this form that Eric made, you can expound on that a little bit about how you think it's threatened. So thank you very much, Eric. We're excited about this. We'll be doing it all summer. In upcoming webinars, we'll be showing the pictures that we have received so far. So those slides that you saw at the beginning, which Taylor McFarland put together at Sierra Club with her workers, those slides will be supplemented with other photos that you all are taking during the summer. And then we're going to put them all together and submit them to the Delaware River Basin Commission voters, the commissioners themselves, and we'll probably end up making a picture book out of it. So make sure you get your photos in there. So I want to thank the Delaware River Frack Ban Coalition before we go into Q&A. Catskill Mountainkeeper, Clean Water Action, Damascus Citizens for Sustainability, Environment New Jersey, Food and Water Watch, New Jersey Sierra Club, Natural Resources Defense Council, and the League of Women Voters of Delaware is an awesome group that has worked for a decade to get us a full ban. And I want to thank everybody for all the hard work and the brilliance that has been brought to this campaign. But in order for us to take it to the finish line, we need all of our watershed community who has stepped up in the past. So that means everybody here and those beyond, your friends and family. So at this point, as we prepare to answer any questions that we have and still try to keep it in the next 10 minutes, just remember as we go forward, the next forum we have, tell your friends about it and join it. The next action that we have, share it through your own personal Facebook. Let's all engage in the coming summer months in order for us to be able to build the power we need to impress these commissioners, the governors and the president of the United States. We know we can do it. We've banned fracking, now we just have to finish the job. Okay, so we have a few questions and I'm gonna try to go through them. If you've put them in the chat, it helps us a lot if you put it over to the Q&A because then we don't have to hunt and peck through the chat. And we're really all just trying to do this while we're talking. So it would be helpful. So let's see, I have a couple questions here. As bad as fracking waste is, does anyone know what the circulation is from the river in Delaware Bay and into the Atlantic Ocean? What other areas, north or south, including other estuaries that would be impacted as well? Are we getting them involved too? Okay, so just think about that picture that Eric showed of the Delaware River watershed. There is one bay and one watershed estuary. It's all connected to the Delaware River, which runs about 330 miles from the headwaters that join at Hancock, New York. There, thank you, Eric. And then it moves downriver. It unites Pennsylvania and New York, comes past the Delaware Water Gap. One of the major tributaries is the Lehigh River, joins the Delaware, goes past Trenton, then comes down to Philadelphia, where the largest tributary of the Delaware, the Schuylkill River, joins it, and at that confluence is Philadelphia. And then right around Philadelphia, the salt line becomes very strong, and you're not able to take water out pretty much below the intakes for Philadelphia and South Jersey. The estuary itself, the tidal waters go all the way up to Trenton. You see that Trenton mark? That is where the tidal influence is, and there is salt in that area between Trenton and Philadelphia. But what they call the salt line, or the line where the water is too salty to drink, begins below Philadelphia and below where the Schuylkill joins it. And then that is the estuary from there on, and then it widens into the bay and joins the Atlantic Ocean. So there aren't other estuaries or other bays. This is the river configuration, and the basin, which takes up, all of the area that's shown in that picture, is all of the land that flows to that watershed. And then on the other side of the basin is what you might call at the top a divide, and then the next watershed over, such as the Susquehanna in Pennsylvania that was talked about earlier as where some of the frack wastewater and water withdrawals would try to come from. That's the Marcellus Shale region of Pennsylvania. We could have had quite a bit of fracking, up to about 40% of the Delaware River watershed is underlain by Marcellus Shale. So the ban on fracking is not just a concept, it is real. It could have been completely destroyed in the upper portions of the Delaware if fracking had been allowed. Discharges of wastewater could happen anywhere in the watershed. It's most likely going to happen in the lower part because of what Sahana explained about the high salt content down there and the less strict regulations. But there are many discharge systems now that don't require even water discharge, and they could be bringing those so-called recycling facilities into the upper Delaware as well. Does anyone else have anything else to add on that? Sorry, I went on a little long. And Jeremiah asked, what is the name of this campaign? Well, the name of the campaign is the Delaware River Frack Ban campaign. And we're defining it over the last 4 years and continue as the full frack ban. So we want to ban it, we want to ban it all. So it's the Delaware River Frack Ban campaign. Anybody else want to? And then I'd like to weigh in on the safety of the disabled. Samantha is a United Spinal Association advocate, and she's trying to network and connect with others for support of the disabled. Would anyone like to take that? Well, one thing we can say is there's a lot of ways to get involved that don't require you to be, physically agile. If you have any kind of limitations to what you physically can do, you could still participate and have just as strong and powerful a voice as somebody who, for instance, tries to swim the Delaware in order to, from top to bottom in order to make a point. And that's because of social media and the advent of the computer age, which allows us to really speak with a big voice through sitting at our keyboard. Anyone else want to add to that?
The name of the campaign is quite clever, calling it a photothon. I love it. And people can send in photos right away and all through the summer. And that includes people with any and all abilities, so that you can show what you are capable of, what you want to preserve, and how important it is to you. and as well as, of course, the beauty of the Delaware River Basin, which is an evident factor in why we live here, as well as the cultural and heritage parts. So my 2 cents.
Yeah, and we're adding, it has a hashtag, hashtag vacation in the basin, so because there's a visual component, we can do some social media on this, in addition to delivering these visuals straight to the decision makers. We can promote this and get fun other people involved in different ways. So vacation in the basin, but we have about 10 more hashtags, and we're having fun with it too. So send us your suggestions and photos.
Do we have questions that I have missed? I think
Yeah, I
scroll
can.
down. Can anyone else read some of the questions there?
Sure.
I think
Not
one had
showing.
asked when the photos are due. Do we have a due date, Eric, for the photos? No due date.
No, not yet.
What that means is all summer.
Yeah.
Don't wait till August.
Right. Oh, I see. Joan asked that. Okay. And then James is asking, I guess the salt line extends north during a drought. Absolutely right. You're right, James. It moves. And when there's low flow, such as in a drought, it moves upstream. Absolutely. Jeff asked, how does frack gas impact water in eastern New Jersey? Does anybody want to answer that?
I could address that. What's happening in eastern New Jersey is actually a lot of the wastewater is getting packed in containers and taken to shipyards near Newark and then being shipped somewhere. We don't know where that's going. And that really highlights the issue here is that we are on the edge of an active Marcellus Basin, and they are trying every which way to get the water out. So if anybody is still out there thinking they're not going to try to put a wastewater facility in the river basin, if it's allowed, get that out of your head. And that's what's happening. The waste and the waste stream that gets shipped around. So I can't speak to a specific eastern New Jersey. That's a Doug O'Malley question. But I just wanted to point out that they're taking it to eastern New Jersey to ship it someplace else at this point.
Yeah, and I think Doug answered, brought up earlier that years back, they were actually bringing frack wastewater into New Jersey for treatment at facilities and processing it here. As far as we know, that's not happening now, but that could happen again, which is why at some point we want to go back to trying to enact a statewide ban on fracking wastewater. We actually did get that passed. It was vetoed by Governor Christie twice. But one other point is that the water itself, I think the question also talked about water. And as Doug said, about 1/3 of New Jersey's water supply comes from the Delaware River, and it's brought through the DNR Canal all the way over to eastern New Jersey. So many of the communities in central New Jersey that extend all the way over almost to the coast, but not quite, get their drinking water from the Delaware River. So your water that you drink, for instance, in Princeton, could in central New Jersey and east of there, some of New Brunswick, for instance, gets their water from the Delaware River, could be contaminated by frack wastewater if it's not banned in the Delaware River watershed.
The other thing too is that the Delaware River recharges the sole source aquifer that supplies South Jersey about 42% of its recharge. So much is taken out of the sole source aquifer. It's not recharged by rainfall, and it is recharged quite a bit by water from the Delaware River and the bay, which of course is filtered through the earth itself, and it becomes cleaned that way. But that would also be affected, and chemicals could be carried further into the sole source aquifer if there was higher contamination. So that's another thing to consider.
Thank you. Thanks, Barbara.
I just wanted to emphasize that treatment, there is no such thing as treatment of frack water. you can't take out chemicals when you don't even know their identity. And with radioactive chemicals, there's really no way to get them all out because radium will come through in different situations where others will precipitate out. And so there is no way of treating this water that would not cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to treat a single batch of the fracking water. So we constantly have people volunteering to have treatment plants. They don't work.
Thank you for that. That really wraps it up, I think, Coralie. It's a great note to end on. This frack wastewater is never going to be treated. And once you use the water, it's polluted forever. So it's a lose-lose when you look at frack wastewater and water for fracking. And that's what we want to stop. We want to stop it everywhere, but we're focusing where we live here in the Delaware River watershed and hope it will be a model for every other place to get banned, not only fracking, but frack wastewater and also water withdrawals for fracking. So thank you, everybody. And thank you to the Delaware River Frack Ban Coalition. Get your photos into Eric. He's waiting for them. You can start tonight. Get a sunset photo in the Delaware River watershed and send it in. Thank you to all of our presenters here tonight. You were all terrific. Thank you to everybody who attended. We really are thrilled to have you, and we look forward to, and we'll be sending out the recording through a link, and also inviting you to our next webinar, which will be later in July. Thank you,
Tracy. Thank you,
Thank you,
Tracy, for bringing us
everyone.
together.
Everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, Wes. Woo! Share the
Thanks for taking
photos.
it.
Bye.